All right, in today's episode, we're going to be working in a very common thing called autocomplete. Now, if you're not familiar with that word, you're definitely familiar with this functionality. This here is just an input field, and when I click on it, we're going to get a list of suggestions, and of course, we'll also be able to type into this to filter down our list. Then, if we click on one of them, the list goes away, and of course, we get our input inside of this box. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to start from scratch, so I'll go ahead and erase everything, and we'll start from the very beginning. Stick around. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to be using Vue CLI. If you have any questions on that, of course, check out earlier in the series when we covered Vue CLI. But we're going to say Vue creates, and we'll simply just call it autocomplete. So for options in this, let's go ahead and do a manually selected features, and I will use the router. And the reason why I want to do it this way is because of the following thing. So for history mode, we'll say yes. We'll go ahead and lint on save. And now this is the part that I'm really interested in. Where do you prefer placing your configs? I really do want a dedicated config file. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. I'm not going to save this as a preset, and we'll let that install. All right, and it is all finished. Now I happen to know that I'm also going to be using Tailwind, so let's go ahead and pull that in now. So npm install Tailwind CSS. All right, and that is all set. I'll be using code today just to change things up, and here's my project in code. So the first thing I need to do is create a main.css file, because right now we don't have one. So let me go ahead and create main.css, and that is going to be inside our source directory. So we have gone through this installation before, but basically we do need to copy these 3 lines. This is straight from the documentation of Tailwind. We'll paste those into my main.css file, and then I have to go ahead and import that file. So the easiest way is just jump over to the main.js file, and let's go ahead and import it right here. So we'll say import main.css right on there. But I do need to go ahead and bring it into post.css. If we go back to the documentation, scroll down just a little bit, right here. So using Tailwind with post.css. So all we need to do is go ahead and copy this plugin section and replace that right here. We'll go ahead and get rid of the comments, and we should be good to go. So with that, our project is all set up. Let me jump back into the terminal, and let me go ahead and cd into autocomplete, the directory, and then let's run npm run surf. All right, and everything compiled. I'll go ahead and visit that site, and sure enough, we are in. So today I'll mostly be working with this about page here, and we can get rid of that, and basically turning this component into the autocomplete component. But of course, the basics of this can be extracted into its own reusable component with no issues. Today we're really focused around the functionality of it. So let me jump back to code. Let me go ahead and open about.vue. And here it is. This is basically this right here. So the first thing I'm going to need is, of course, I'm going to need an input. We know that. Input is basically what we're going to be typing into. So let's start off with just using a vbind into this element. And our example, of course, is with US states. So let me go ahead and type in state. And let's add the script section here. And we'll say we're going to have a data property. It'll be a function that returns an object. And in it, we'll have a single piece of data for now, which is simply just state. I'll go ahead and initialize that to just an empty string. So if we take a look at that in the browser, it's there. You just can't see it. Let's add some classes to it to make it a little bit nicer. So the first thing is let's add a BG gray of 300, and then let's add some padding. So we'll say px4 py2. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, much nicer. And finally, one thing I do want to do is turn off autocomplete. So autocomplete will set to off. Otherwise, every time we type into this field, our browser is going to try to autocomplete. And I'm not interested in that for this example. So we'll turn that off with autocomplete set to off. All right, so we have this running already. So what's the next thing we need? Well, we need some data. So let's give it some data. We'll say states. We'll set that equal to an array. And we'll add, let's say Florida, Alabama. We'll add Alaska, since the spelling is so similar. And finally, Texas. Okay, so we have our states. So now let's do this. As a very simple implementation, let's go ahead and on input, let's call a new method called filter states. So filter states will be a method. Let me add that down here. We'll say methods, filter states. So what do we need to do in here? Well, first and foremost, we need to lowercase everything because we're not sure if the user is actually going to follow the convention of these states. But if we lowercase both of them, at least we know that everything will match in terms of casing. Let's go ahead and add a new data property here, and we'll say filtered states. And under filter states, initially we'll set that to an empty array. So in here, all we would need to do is the following. We'll go ahead and say this.filter states equals. So we could take this.states, right? So this array right here of states, we'll go ahead and filter, and each one will basically have a state at some point. And then inside of this callback, let's do the following. Let's return the state dot to lowercase. That way it matches. And if it starts with, and then we need whatever the user actually inputted into our input field. In this case, we save that to state using vbind of state. So we can simply say, all right, so then this dot state, and then we'll have to do the same thing to lowercase. That way they both match. That way the casing is not a problem. And this, believe it or not, is the very basic implementation, and it is actually working. So if we open up About, we can check out this filter states, which is currently empty. But if we start to type, whoops, looks like it's not working. We must have made a mistake. Let me go back to code and see here. So this should be V model. I'm sure you saw that. Let me go ahead and hit refresh on this one. Let's hit refresh. And now I'll go ahead and add FL, and let's check this out. And sure enough, the filter states is now containing Florida. Now if we type in AL, then now we see Alabama and Alaska being filtered. So basically our filtering is working. All we really need now is just a way to display it. So with that, easy enough to do. So I'll go ahead and add basically a new div here. So we'll say div, but this div is only going to show if we actually have some filtered states. So we could do that by saying, all right, vif. So if you have some filtered states, in that case, we're actually going to show this div. Otherwise, we're not going to want to show them. And for now, let's go ahead and add an unordered list. And then inside of here, we'll have a list item for each one. So to do that, we'll use v4, and we'll say, all right, filtered state in filtered states. And in here, we'll just go ahead and echo out what we actually have for filtered state. All right, let's check that out in the browser. I'll hit refresh. AL, there we go. So now we have Alabama and Alaska, and if I keep typing, there we go. So now we filtered it down to just this one. But of course, when I click on this, I want to go ahead and replace this with whatever actually gets clicked. So let's add a new event listener for click. So if we get clicked, let's go ahead and set our state to filtered state. Obviously, set state doesn't exist yet, so let's add that as another method. So we'll go down here, right under filter states, we'll add set state, and this will receive our state. And all we need to do in here is just say this.state equals state. Simple enough. Let's try it out. We'll type in F. I'm going to click on Florida. And now notice that Florida get replaced up here. Here it is again. I'll pick Alaska, and as soon as I click it, my text gets replaced with whatever I clicked on. Now, one thing you'll notice right away is, well, this is not going away. So that's not great. Obviously, once I clicked on Alaska, I want that to disappear. Let's go ahead and style that before we even get to that part though. So this is simple enough to do with Tailwind. Let's go ahead and give this a class of width 48. That way it is nice and wide. And then also let's give it a BG gray of 800 and then text white. And then on the actual list item, let's add some classes as well. We'll add them right here. We'll say class. And for this one, let's add some top and bottom margin with PY2. And then let's add a border to the bottom. Finally, let's go ahead and give it a cursor of pointer. That way we get the correct cursor for that. And there we go. So now we have this, but now you notice it's all the way on the left, and really it should be right underneath this. So of course, Flex comes to the rescue on this one. So we'll turn the whole thing into a Flex container, but on the column, so Flex call. And then all we had to do is just items center. And that should fix it for us. And there we go. So we are good to go on this one. I'll type in F and we have that. And again, when I click on this, I want it to go away. So for that, we actually need to keep track on whether it's open or not. So let's add a new data property here and we'll say modal. And initially our modal will be set to false, meaning it is not showing. So we're only going to show this if we have filter states and modal, meaning the modal is equal to true. So not only are we going to do that whenever there are filter states, but we also need to make sure that modal is set to true. So now what would happen is basically it never shows up because at this point we're never setting that to true. So we need to find some strategic points where we actually set that modal to true. So how about on focus? So we can add a new event and say, all right, if you are focused, meaning you got clicked on, in that case, then modal should be set to true. All right, let's try that one. We'll click on it and there we go. So now we have that. But now on click, we know that we need to disappear. But the nice thing is we wrap that in its own method. So when we set their state, we're going to set the state, but we're also going to set this.modal equals to false. That way it goes away. Okay, let's try one more time. F, and when we click on Florida, it gets replaced and it goes away. Now one thing you'll notice, of course, if you click on it again, then it actually pops in. But the next problem we have is you kind of expect to be able to click somewhere outside and get rid of this. But there is no real easy way to do this. Really what we need to do is cover the whole thing in a blanket. And if that gets clicked, in that case, we'll go ahead and set the modal equal to false. Now easy enough to do. Let's add a new div here and let's add some classes. Now at first I will give it a BG red of 300 just so that it's really visible and you can see exactly what we are doing. But all we need to do is go ahead and set this to absolute and then set it to inset -0. This will set top to 0, bottom to 0, left and right to 0. So let's check this out in the browser and see what it looks like. So we'll hit refresh and sure enough, everything is covered in this red background. But now we've lost track of our actual items. We are covering our items. So we're going to have to set some Z indexes on this. So if we gave this new blanket, if we gave that a Z index of 0, then of course on our input, we can give this maybe a Z index of 10, as well as this modal. We'll go ahead and give this a class of Z10 as well. That way they are layered properly. And sure enough, if I click on F, now Florida is visible and that is visible. Now the red of course is just temporary. This is just so that you see what we're actually working with. If we get rid of it, now it's like it's not even there. You can't even tell. But what we can do on this is if this gets clicked, then we can add an event listener. So let's say if you get clicked on, then we'll go ahead and set the modal equals to false. And if we hit refresh now, we'll type in F and I'm going to click right out here on the white and notice how that modal goes away. So pretty easy way to handle that. Now the last thing I want to handle is the initial state. So when I originally click on this, I kind of want to give the user some potential answers already, right off the bat. So to do that, what we actually need to do is create an initial state. And to create an initial state, I will use the mounted listener. So when the component is mounted, in that case, let's go ahead and do the following. Let's just simply filter our states. So when the component gets mounted, go ahead and filter the states. However, at this stage, states will be equal to blank. And let's see what actually happens. When we click on it, not much happens, right? Because this is not matching to anything, which makes sense. So why don't we add a new if statement here, and we'll say, all right, so if this.state, meaning the actual input field, .length, is equal to 0, in that case, let's just give them all of the states. So let's go ahead and say, all right, this.filter states just simply equals this.states, meaning everything, the whole array. And if we click on it, whoops, that should have popped up. Let's find out what happens. So filter states, of course, not filtered states. It needs to be this method call right here. All right, let's go back to Chrome, give that a go. And now if I click on it, there we go. Now you get a list of everything right off the bat. And of course, I can click Alaska and it goes away. And I can click outside and it also goes away. But notice one thing now. I clicked on Alaska, but we still have a list. So it actually didn't filter. And at first that might be a little bit confusing. Why is that not filtering? Even though obviously Florida does not start with Alaska. But what's happening is that the way that we are currently triggering that filter is using, let me go over here, is using at input. So what's happening is only when there is actual input change, then we filter states. If there is no input change, as in that initial click, notice I never actually typed anything in here and I clicked on Florida. So we're still seeing all of the states. So to change that, why don't we, instead of using this, why don't we put a watcher on that state property? So check this out. I'm going to delete that click event, but now of course we need a way of triggering this filter states function. So easy enough, we'll add a watch property here, and we're going to be watching the state, meaning that vModel state. So if state changes, in that case, let's go ahead and call filter states. So essentially we are doing the same thing, because this will get triggered if you typed into the filter, but it will also get triggered if we clicked on one of the options and actually change the input, because in that case state also changes. Looks like the same mistake again, not filter states, filter states. All right, let's try this one more time. Click on Florida, come back here, and sure enough, now we only see Florida. So that's pretty cool. And of course, if I start to remove everything, everything comes back, and we can do and filter exactly the same way, because we are actually watching for that state property. So a lot of cool concepts on this very real world scenario that you're so used to seeing everywhere. So that's basically how we would do it. So for some extra credit, obviously our states need to be customizable. We're not going to want to actually have this data inside of it. So of course, we would use something like Axios to fetch a list of states or a list of some sort, but I'll let you handle that on your own. In this lesson, we're mostly focused around the functionality of how to make this autocomplete work. So as always, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.